12, 2023, the most recent incarnation of Coffee and Conversation. I don't see too many coffee cups on the screen this morning, so I'm glad to know you're all wide awake and ready to go. Scott, Scott, our guest, is the only one who needs to stay awake. There we
Right, I was
go.
gonna say.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much. We're privileged to have Scott Beauchamp with us this morning, the French version of his English name. Scott is a representative of Friends of BWCA. We're pleased to have the Friends back talking to us. We had Chris Knopf a year and a half ago. So we know a little bit about Friends, but nevertheless, there may be some new people this morning. So, Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and the organization? And, one of the things I've noticed about environmental organizations in recent times is how many there are. And that's a double-edged sword. I mean, it's great that there's so many people who are active and involved, but I wonder about the duplication of administration and fundraising and all those kinds of things. So anyway, with all of that wonderful background, tell us about you and the Friends.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll just address that last part first. I've heard people say it before, and I think it's agreed. We're the land of 10,000 lakes, but we're also the land of 10,000 nonprofits sometimes, right? And so, there's exactly like you said, double-edged sword. We can maybe return to that the ins and outs of that conversation at the end, but I think what you said is pretty accurate. So yeah, absolutely. I am the lobbyist policy director for the Friends. So working with the legislature as well as trying to work on the political side of things for a C4 organization, essentially trying to, accomplish our mission of wilderness protection, right? And so obviously I'm going to get a lot more into that today. A little background on the Friends. We were formed in 1976, so we like to think we're the original Boundary Waters organization. We were formed for the purpose of actually getting the Boundary Waters designated as a federal wilderness area. That was accomplished in 1978 under President Jimmy Carter. And so really we're trying to continue that legacy today. And so we really work in three main areas, and the third one is kind of what my presentation will be about. But first is people, right? We want to protect the animals, we want to protect the trees, but first and foremost, we want to protect the wilderness so people can get up there, right? Our motto is, this is our heritage in Minnesota, whether you've been here for 5 years or 50 years, right? We want to make sure that everybody has access to the Boundary Waters. And so we actually have started a program called No Boundaries to the Boundary Waters, where we actually go into schools, teach kids about the wilderness, how to do it, what it is, what's up there, but then actually also provide scholarships for them to be able to go up on their own and take trips with their class, for kids that like someone like me, I'm very fortunate where, when I wanted to go up, I could call my uncle and he'll give me everything I need, right? And not everyone has that. And so we want to make sure that we're providing those opportunities. And so this is, I think, our third summer doing it. We've gotten larger every summer. And so we're really fortunate in that area to do that work. And so that's one part of it. The second
Let me
part.
jump in. Let me jump
Yeah,
in
yeah.
for a second. I'm interested when you say you go into schools and do presentations. One of the other hats I wear is as a volunteer at an elementary school in
Mm,
Minneapolis. Do
yeah.
you come to elementary schools? What kind of things do you do, and how do I get you on their calendar?
100%. So I personally, it's kind of a weird deal. It depends. I mean, I guess this is the group that would want to talk about the politics of it. We are not really
Sure.
allowed to talk about the mining aspect of it because some of our work is paid for from the state of Minnesota. And actually, I think you were formerly in Rick Hansen's district potentially, or was right on the
Right.
border. And he did a lot of work to actually get us grant funding to do this through the state of Minnesota. However, there were some legislators that wanted the mining quite badly that did not want us teaching kids about the dangers of mining. So it's not me that goes into the schools, it's our education team. So we just teach about, and obviously it depends on the grade, but basically, we teach about the animals that are up there, and then, what it is, how it came to be, really the nature and biology aspect of it. And then for the older kids, we'll actually teach them, some skills. And so I would just say, you have my email, just shoot me a reminder and I'll connect you with our education director. And she can get it set up because, yeah, we absolutely do presentations for all ages.
Fabulous. All right, keep going.
No, yeah, happy to do it. And I'll shoot that, I'll extend that invitation as well for everyone. And I'll, at the end of this, put my email in the chat. And yeah, we can definitely make that happen. The second area that we work in is community, right? We know that, the wilderness is great, but also, the reason that it can be so great is because of the wilderness edge communities like Ely and Grand Marais, right? And so Well, there is a thriving outdoor recreation industry right now where thousands of jobs depend on that. Not everyone is a part of that, right? And then part of, some of that is, and that's something we can understand. And so we want to make sure that we're helping to bring those communities economic development in non-polluting ways, because we feel like, some of that drive for these polluting projects, which I'm going to get into in a minute, comes from people who feel like, what other option do we have? And so we certainly understand that. And so we do want to try to work in, whether, we lobbied for rural broadband. It's a lot of times working on more individual basis, with like to bring the Ely State Theater up there, things like that. And so that's a part of our work as well. We have an Ely office, and so we do that work. And then third, is wilderness protection, right? If there's no wilderness, there's no Friends of the Boundary Waters wilderness. And so that's really what I want to talk about today. That's primarily where my work is located. Unfortunately, there's there's climate change, which I'm sure we are all very aware of. But there's also a more direct threat, I guess I would say, or immediate threat of copper nickel sulfide mining. Likely you've heard about this. I hope you've heard about this. We're not doing our job if you haven't. So that's on me if you haven't. But this is a really major threat to Minnesota's environment, and especially our clean water. This is totally different than taconite mining. It's never been done in Minnesota before. So sometimes you'll hear people say, "Oh, well, we've been doing it 140 years." That's not accurate. This has never been done in Minnesota before. Additionally, it is considered the most polluting industry in America by the EPA, and it's been polluted. It's polluted everywhere it goes. And I'll get into this, but it's an inherently polluting process. And the bottom line is, it's just not compatible with the especially northeastern Minnesota's water-rich environment. And then when you actually look at the proposals themselves, it gets even scarier. So you can see this map here, the Twin Metals mine. That was proposed just outside the boundary waters. And so sometimes people will say to me, "Oh, Scott, well, what's the problem with it? We're not mining in the boundary waters." But of course, as we all know, water flows, right? It doesn't follow the rules, the lines that we draw on a map. And so, if it happens upstream, it's going to happen downstream. And so Twin Metals being right outside the boundary waters is extremely scary proposal. Secondly, the main mine that we work on, the other main mine we work,
Scott,
yeah,
let me jump in with a question.
please.
I notice on the map, or at least the one on the left, you've got that square box, but then if you look over the top of the box, it looks like there's some. What is the orange stuff? Is that mining, or is that where where the sulfide is, or what?
Great question. Great question. So the orange is actually the path of pollution. So you can see where that water, that's essentially where the water flows. So these mines, they leach pollution into the groundwater or into the surface water, and that's actually where it would go. So for Twin Metals, for instance,
north. It flows north.
Yeah, it flows north.
So you have studiously whited out Canada, if I'm not mistaken. Where does Canada fit into this whole scheme?
That's a great question, and I get it from time to time. And so essentially, Canada does not want to weigh in on this. We've tried to get them to weigh in. The cynical part of me is like, in their mind, they have, we have one boundary waters in America, right? In Canada, they have about 15 places like the boundary waters. And so I don't know if it's just because they don't want to, and I'll get into this a little bit, but the previous administration was very much in favor of these mines. And so, I don't know if it was something where they didn't want to cross them. But we've tried to reach out to the Canadian consulate, Canadian legislators, and really gotten nothing back. So if anybody has connections, with Trudeau or something, let me know. I'd love to speak with them. But as of now, we've had essentially no luck getting Canada involved. But you're right. Again, as I said, that border, if anyone's been up there on on those border lakes, it's not like there's a big chain or a line, right? It's just a river, and on one side you're in America and the other side you're in Canada. So it certainly doesn't stop. The pollution doesn't stop in Canada.
Right. And I remember that with some of the pipeline stuff, there needed to be permitting through the State Department if it was going to go international. Is the State Department involved in any of this stuff?
Not the State Department in particular, but some of this is involved with the with the federal government, certainly, and I'll get into that in a moment. But yeah, not particularly the State Department in these cases, because these are all, the mines themselves are strictly in Minnesota. But yeah, the
Go ahead.
pollution threat is to Canada as well. And so actually it's a good point that you bring that up, because this, as you can see, the reason that this is well, not the reason, but one of the reasons it's such an interesting issue to work on is because these two mines here are right on either side of the Laurentian Divide, which is the continental divide. So everything north flows north, everything south flows south. So that's why the Twin Metals one, you see it goes north. The Polymet mine, actually, which is right below the Laurentian Divide, flows south. And the reason that this one is so scary in particular is because it's located in the headwaters of the St. Louis River. St. Louis River is the main tributary for Lake Superior. Lake Superior is actually home to 10% of the world's fresh water. So it's kind of an insane stat to think about. The entire world, I mean, maybe you could say Wisconsin and Michigan have a little bit of it, but we all like think, especially me, that Lake Superior, it's a Minnesota lake, right? And so that's a huge responsibility we have there. And so that's what's really worrisome about Polymet. And I'll get into some of the more specifics in a bit. So what are we really talking about here that's so worrisome? Well, these mines leach a lot. They destroy a lot of land, they destroy wetlands, but the main thing we're worried about is sulfuric acid, aka acid mine drainage. The problem is this is why I say it's different than taconite mining. When you do the process for taconite mining, it creates rust. That the waste is rust, which is not necessarily great, but when you do the process for sulfide mining, and when I say sulfide, this is for gold, copper, nickel, cobalt, anything like that. It's contained in sulfur ore, and the ore is 99+% sulfur and less than 1% of the metal, copper, nickel, whatever. So when you dissolve that and divide it up, you have 99% sulfuric waste, and that combines with water and air to make sulfuric acid. And that's what you see in this picture right here. And so you can just look it up, and I can give you examples as well of Mount Poly in Canada, which is a very similar environment to northeastern Minnesota. They had a collapse of this, and it just pours sulfuric waste into the water. And so think about this going into the clean water, the boundary waters, or Lake Superior. It really would be a nightmare.
Is lithium one of the metals that, or if lithium is a metal, is lithium mined in this as well?
Lithium is mined in the same way, but it is not. There's not significant amount of lithium in Minnesota.
Okay.
So these mines are primarily actually for copper, and then a little bit of nickel as well. So yeah, but good question.
Why?
But yeah,
Why here? I mean, isn't there copper in lots of places? How come
there
they
is.
need it here? Is there such a concentrated amount of copper here that makes it really a wonderful place to go mining for copper?
No, definitely not. And yes, you're right. There's certainly lots of areas to get it. First and foremost, recycling. Recycling actually can produce far more metals than these mines have. The motto is kind of, in my opinion, to answer that question, is really two things. It's one, the way that these mining companies work, they don't actually care about any one individual mine. Their goal is to have as many permits to mine as possible, and then they can just pick and choose which is the most profitable from there. These are some of the most giant companies on earth, so they can afford to just keep going and going. And then, for instance, Polymet, which we'll get into, they were actually fully permitted for a whole year before we got their permits struck down, and they didn't start mining, right? And I think that tells you a lot, because they really just want to have it in their portfolio, and then they can pull the trigger, mine for a little bit, and then if the prices go down, stop it, and things like that. And so I think it's that, and then also just the fact that Minnesota does have a history of taconite mining. There's kind of a ready group of supporters, that remember the days of taconite mining when, back in the day when there's a lot of jobs in it. And so I think it's kind of a combination of those two things why it's so focused on Minnesota in particular.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw Rob Schumer's question in the chat. He asks whether the owners of the company are foreign.
Yeah, I'm gonna put a pin in that, Rob. But yes, I have a slide on that. But yeah, you're seeing where I'm going with this. They absolutely are.
Okay. This feels like a NIMBY issue, not in my backyard. Go
No,
take it
see,
somewhere else.
I don't agree with that, but I do hear that a lot. And the reason I don't agree is because, to me, a NIMBY issue is like, right on West 7th, when people are like, oh, I don't want to put up with 2 years of construction so we can have a light rail on West 7th, right? When it really would improve the whole area. to me, we're talking about an area that has world-class resources, 10% of the world's fresh water. We would never say someone who doesn't want to mine the Amazon is being NIMBY, right? It's a world-class resource. And I think that's what we have here as well. I think if you draw this up you look at a globe, it's one of the worst places on earth to do it. And I think in Minnesota, we can and should recognize that we do have a unique responsibility to the world, especially with climate change getting worse. You look at Colorado, you look at California and their droughts. We don't want to have that here. And even if we don't have that here, other states are going to be coming for our water, because they need it. And so we need to make sure that we have those resources protected. So that's why I would say it's not an NIMBY issue to me.
Yeah, well, actually, I think we are saying the same thing. It's
yeah,
Minnesotan saying, why do you need to take my copper and despoil my land? Go somewhere else.
right, exactly. And that's really why we say, like, really, and you're absolutely right. And I'll follow up when we come out with this, but there's going to be some metals recycling legislation introduced next year that would be designed to do exactly what you're talking about. Say, hey, if we really need to produce this copper, let's do it through recycling. Let's not do it through spoiling our water. So yeah, I totally agree with you. And that's really what this picture right here is all about. Right behind that tree line, that's where Twin Metals was proposing their mine, and we literally canoed up and took this picture. And so you can tell that this is not an industrial mining area. This is not a sacrifice zone, right? This is a real serious wilderness area and something that needs to be protected. Fortunately, if I can get my slide to go here, we did have some really good news recently on the Twin Metals mine. Again, this one was on federal land. And so I'll spare you a little bit of the back and forth, but essentially Trump had given the green light to this mine, and Biden actually said, no, that's wrong. Then they actually not only canceled the mining leases for Twin Metals, they did something called a mineral withdrawal, which says this area outside the wilderness cannot be mined in the Rainy River watershed for up to 20 years. The Rainy River watershed is home to the western portion of the boundary waters where Ely is and areas like that. This is the most they can do by law. The administration can only go up to 20 years by law. And I'll get into the negatives of that. Congresswoman Betty McCollum does have a bill that would make this permanent, because it can be done permanently through an act of Congress. But so far that is yet to be able to pass. But still, as of right now, Twin Metals is, for all intents and purposes, dead, pending that big old asterisk that we're all worried about, the 2024 election, right? And unfortunately, things could be reversed by a new administration. But as of right now, it'll be more difficult now that this has been done. But as of right now, we're in a really good place with Twin Metals.
Right. Is Angie Craig supporting that legislation?
As of now, no. I'm not saying that she's opposing it, but as of now, I believe she has not taken a position on it, and we would certainly love for her to do so. And so if anyone wants to send her a note, I can actually I'll make a note to put. We have a take action link, but also if anyone wants to send her a message and encourage her to get on board, we'd love to have her.
What's the name of the bill?
It's the Boundary Waters Permanent Protection Act. And so, I believe she, as of right now, I think she is the only Democratic representative, I should say, in Minnesota not supporting the bill. Again, not saying she's opposed to it. I know, in Congress, sometimes it can become a thing where it's, certain people have their own certain focus. But yeah, we'd absolutely love for her to sign on. Absolutely. And I will share a take action link at the end. I just made a note. The second mine that we're talking about is Polymet. Again, Polymet, like I said, was the first fully permitted copper nickel mine in Minnesota. And again, we have some good news on that. But you can see here that this is where it's proposed. Sometimes people say, oh, this is an industrial zone, it's no problem. What's the problem? But this is actually an aerial shot of where it's proposed, and so you can see very much an outdoor and nature area. Another thing that's particularly worrisome about Polymet is that it's a really big environmental justice threat, which is actually the case with a lot of these mines. It can be. It's located right upstream of the Fond du Lac Reservation. Fond du Lac is a sovereign nation. They have treaty rights to hunt, fish, get wild rice from the St. Louis River. And the St. Louis River, like I said, passes right through their treaty lands and reservation. And so they are some of the first, I would say we're their allies, right? And they're the ones really leading this fight, and they, and which I'll get to in a moment, had a really big win on this. But thinking about when we talk about environmental justice and how important that is, this is certainly one of those issues.
Well, I don't know if you're talking about the MPCA case that came down about 2 weeks ago,
That's
but
actually a different one. So we've
oh,
had
all right.
two really big wins, but I will get to that because
I,
that.
I was I noticed Justice McKeag's concurrence where she specifically called out the need to protect the Fond du Lac band,
Yep.
and I read fleetingly and only parts of it, but my impression was this was more cheerleading than it was the ability to protect them. At least her concurrence was like that. Hey, guys, you got to recognize that this has an impact, but not that they had the ability to do anything about
Yeah.
anything about it.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I'll get to that in a little bit because yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. That was a big part of that. There's a separate case I'm referring to, but that was a big part. We've had two really big wins on Polymet within the last 2 months, 2.5 months to 3 months, and so I'll get to both of those.
Good.
So one other thing I like to highlight, particularly with Polymet, because again, like I said, this was the one that got farthest along. So we know more about the specifics of their project. Was that the state DNR actually permitted Polymet to do what's called an upstream tailings dam. This is now known to be inherently more unstable, or inherently less stable, I should say, than other types of dams. It's essentially where they use sand and rock to build up a dam where they keep this giant lake of that sulfuric acid, right? And so, as you can imagine, it doesn't sound that stable. It's because it's not. And so, what happened since then, that was permitted in 2018. In 2019, a dam of the same design collapsed in Brazil, in Brumadinho. You might have heard of this. Unfortunately, it was a tragedy. It killed over 250 people. And I'm actually going to show you a video of what that looked like quickly. So this video that you're seeing here is actually the dam collapsing.
Oh my.
And so as that video showed, after this tragedy, Brazil banned upstream tailings dams. They've also been banned in Chile, Peru. Canada has serious restrictions on it, all because of disasters that they've had. And the reason we say not safe enough for Brazil is because during that same time, if you remember, the same administration that banned this type of dam was actively letting the Amazon burn, right? So that's how bad this was, that they felt, they didn't care about letting the Amazon burn. That wasn't an environmental concern, but this was, and that's how scary it is. And to this day, the DNR is still yet to revoke that, that dam design. Quickly, I just want to touch on, we really focus on these two mines, but there are also additional threats coming down the line. One is called the Talon Mine, which you might have heard of. This is in Tamarack, Minnesota, Aiken County. We are not, we're supportive of the organizations leading that fight. It's a little bit out of our geographic zone, but it's also the same. It's more for nickel than copper, like these other ones are for copper. But that is definitely coming down the line. And if you're interested in that, and we're very worried about that one as well. And so that, just want to put that on people's radar. And if you're interested, I can connect you with people who know more than I do. Secondly, you also might have heard there was a merger with the Polymet mine with a company called Teck. And the reason that this one is so scary, although I believe the process has been significantly slowed with our recent legal victories, is Teck, as you can see in this line here, that goes right over the watershed. So, I was talking about one flows north, one flows south. Well, if Polymet were to merge with Teck, it would actually be north and south of Laurentian Divide. So it would have the distinction where it pollute both the boundary waters and Lake Superior. And so the merger just became final earlier this year. But As of now, they have not been able to move forward with any mine plans or anything like that. So we're kind of just waiting in a wait and see period to see what will happen with that, with all the polymet losses. But I do want to put that on people's radar that, even though we are in a good place with polymet and twin metals, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Well, you raised an interesting issue a little bit ago, and that is just because they get a permit doesn't mean they're going to start mining. So are the ones that you just described that you're putting on our radar about permitting or actually starting mining?
So that's a great question. So no mine has actually even entered the permitting process except for Polymet. Polymet was fully permitted, and then they were, like I'll get to in a moment. A number of them have been rejected. Twin Metals had just started their permitting process when they were rejected, so they were kind of out of it. Talon is right now in the process of preparing their mine plan to enter the permitting phase, and Tech hasn't even applied for the permitting phase. So none of these are even past the permitting phase. No, these ones are not even in the permitting phase. And Polymet, like I said, was permitted, but now they got sent back to that phase. So yeah, none of them have received their permits as of now.
So the good news is that so far there hasn't been any sulfide damage to the water up in that area.
Exactly. Exactly.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And that's actually a really good segue because that's where we're at right now. And we want to keep it that way, right? We don't want to be the people afterwards saying, "Oh, what are we going to do to clean it up?" We want to be the people to say, "Hey, we prevented it from happening in the first place," which is sometimes more difficult. So I know this is all scary and certainly worrisome, but I want to focus on what we can do, right? Here's what we do at the Friends. Litigation, which I've been talking about, and I'll get into a little bit more, challenging their permits, right? But also legislation. And that's really why I'm here today, because we will be in this fight as long as it takes, but it'd be a lot better if we didn't have to fight them, every permit by permit, lawsuit by lawsuit. We want to pass legislation that's a little bit more sweeping, that actually makes in Minnesota have strict environmental regulations that protect us, because right now we do not.
Okay.
As
you may or may not get into that in more detail, but I'd love to get your sense of the state of the legislature, particularly the Senate.
Oh, don't worry.
How redistricting affected your abilities in that arena. Happily, the Senate doesn't come up for re-election for another few years, not next year. Where are you with the legislature? And we often have State Senator Jim Carlson on our calls with us, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem like he got on this morning. By the way, we do have Eagan City Councilman Gary Hansen with us, and I don't know if municipalities are relevant, particularly metro municipalities, but if they are, please note that Gary's with us, and you can speak to anything that he might do to help while you go through this.
Yeah, no. So I'll definitely, Gary, nice to meet you. Glad to have you on. I think we're always open to ideas. Absolutely. The more supporters, the better. I'd have to probably talk with my legal side to think about like what a municipality could do. But yeah, it's an interesting thought. But on the legislative side, don't worry, you're going to get plenty of legislative information. So I'll give you that in a second. I just quickly, citizen action. Obviously, you all know about citizen action. That's what you're doing right now. We really look at this issue as we have the science and the people on our side, and they have the money. And so we're going to see who wins. And so far, we've been winning, and that's because of citizen action. Fortunately, representatives and senators like Jim Carlson weren't very hard to convince. They've been on board, but some of them, the reason that they're on board is because of citizens calling. And so that's really what that's all about. And we have a citizen action network. And if anyone wants to be a part of that, shoot me a note, because that's really where we get a lot of our work from. And then finally, I won't touch on this too much, but we do have a political action committee, which is technically a separate organization where we endorse and give money to candidates. And a little bit of a spoiler here, but we have endorsed a couple candidates for 52. So we're very grateful for that. Like I mentioned,
you're welcome to tell us who they are.
We'll get there. Don't worry. I'm going to build the suspense.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So protecting in the courtroom, like I said, we work with the Fond du Lac Band and Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy and Water Legacy to challenge these permits. And so we've actually, like I said, has two really major wins that I'll get into here on the Polymet mine in particular. On the first one on the left here was back in June. Like I mentioned, this is the one the Fond du Lac Band won. Fond du Lac, as a sovereign nation, they have treaty rights to hunt and fish and all that stuff, like I said, but they also have their own water quality standards that are supposed to be considered, at the same level as Minnesota's or Wisconsin's or Canada's, right? Um, Unfortunately, there's a federal permit for the Polymet mine. And so again, one of the key distinctions here is, I know it gets technical, but the Twin Metals mine was on federal land. That's why the federal administration was able to act on it. The Polymet mine is on state land. And so the only permit that the federal government could even have any impact over was the wastewater permit. Or sorry, I should say the wetland destruction permit, which is essentially how much, wetlands you're allowed to destroy. As part of doing that permit, they were supposed to consider whether or not it would impact Fond du Lac's water quality downstream. Under the Trump administration, they failed to even consider it. They didn't even look at it and say, no, it'll be fine. They didn't even look at it. And so when the administration changed, Fond du Lac said, hey, you need to look at this or we're going to sue. Lo and behold, when they looked at it, EPA studied it. Guess what? Oh, it very likely would impact downstream water, and they recommended rejecting the permit. And so the EPA and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers actually struck down that permit. And we actually had nothing to do with that. But we're big fans of the decision and great work by Fond du Lac. And so that in and of itself could be a death blow to the project. However, if you actually go a step further, and this is what Ron was talking about, and this is really gets into not only environmental issues, but also government transparency. We had a major win just last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago now, but 2 weeks ago now, on one of the permits that was granted by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. This was a project where it's a really scary situation when you think about it. This happened in 2018 under the Dayton administration, actually, surprisingly enough. What happened essentially was the EPA is supposed to comment on these permits and say, okay, yeah, this will protect clean water. It'll uphold the Clean Water Act or not. And the EPA scientists who worked on this permit wrote a list detailing over 24 reasons why it would not uphold the Clean Water Act. Instead of submitting that as part of the public comment period, which is what's supposed to happen, our regulators actually called EPA and said, hey, we don't want this as part of the public comment period. Don't submit this letter in writing. Read it to us over the phone and trust us, we'll take care of it. And that has, of course, the result that, we as the public didn't know about these concerns from the EPA. And so that happened. Nobody knew about it. EPA called, read it over the phone. 6 months later, the same scientists sent a follow-up letter saying, hey, have you addressed these things? All these concerns. 2 days later, the permit was issued. So they didn't address all his concerns within those 2 days. This was really scary because the only reason we knew about this was because after the permit was issued, that scientist became a whistleblower and actually released and leaked these documents. And I don't know if leak is the right word because he stood behind it, but he became a whistleblower on it. And that was the only reason we were able to find out that this concerns even happened. And so, long story short, this case, obviously we challenged that. It went all the way to the Minnesota Supreme Court. And what Ron was talking about earlier is they found in our favor unanimously that the MPCA's decision was arbitrary and capricious, that they did suppress scientific data to avoid bad press about the project. And not only that, as Ron was talking about, that the other impact of this was that it really essentially ignored Fond du Lac's concerns about environmental justice. And they essentially said, I'd encourage you, if you're into reading legal documents, to read this decision, because it is a really crushing assessment of our own regulatory agencies and what they did and what they did not do. And so again, this permit was rejected. And so between these two decisions, it was a really, really big blow to the Polymet project. And so we're kind of waiting to see what Polymet will do next. But yeah, it's very, very good for us, but worrisome that this was allowed to even get this far and it had to even go to the Minnesota Supreme Court.
Well, let me push back a little bit on your use of the word crushing as a decision. Yes, an arbitrary and capricious finding is pretty unusual, especially after it's gone through multiple levels of court review and to reverse and to make that finding. That I found that to be pretty unusual. But nevertheless, the remand from the Minnesota Supreme Court is pretty limited. and what they have asked the MPCA to do. They have not reopened for further public comment on this issue.
No, they did.
Did they? That's not
Yeah,
the
they
way I
did.
read it.
Yeah,
Okay.
the EPA is going to be having to submit their comments, and then there'll be more public comments on it. And actually, what they said was, and I'll put some good quotes in here for you. But you know, what they said was, we can't even decide if this permit is up, you know, safe or not because of what MPCA did. We don't even have the facts to be able to decide it. And so that's actually why it was sent back to the MPCA. And so, you know, I'll put some. I don't want to get out of the PowerPoint, but I'll put some quotes in here that you know, certainly were, in my opinion, maybe it is up for interpretation, but for my opinion, to have the Supreme Court say this about our own agencies was pretty strong repudiation.
Dwayne asks a question about bond for future damage to the environment. I think there's a name for that, financial responsibility or fiscal responsibility or something like that. That's part of the permitting process, is it not?
Yeah, and actually, I have a slide on that in just a minute. You guys are you guys
Okay,
are very knowledgeable. You're on it, but yes, absolutely. So
good.
yeah,
All right.
and yes, but no, Dwayne, it's right on, and I'm gonna get to that next in a minute here. And so, you know, really, like I said, what are we here for? To protect the environment. We want to update our legislation, and so our legislation is really aimed actually at specific issues like that. And so, first and foremost, you know, I talked a little bit about the Pollution Control Agency. Also, our DNR, you know, it's very worrisome because a lot of people don't realize this. They actually have a legal obligation to promote mining as well as to protect natural resources. This is kind of a leftover from a bygone era, in my opinion. But we think this is a clear conflict of interest. And actually, this support for this legislation passed into the DFL party platform at the 2020 state convention. So we're really happy to see that. Essentially, what it would say is take this responsibility to promote mining away from DNR, shift it to DEED. DEED is not a permitting agency. They can promote it all they want. But DNR would only have to focus on the actual natural resource protection instead of also trying to promote mining, because, you know, it does create a weird situation where the DNR scientists may say, hey, this is really risky, but the political leadership may say, hey, we need to promote mining. And unfortunately, you know, with a lot of their decisions, like approving that dam and the financial assurance, which I'm about to get to in the next slide, really worrisome.
How many co-authors are on that conflict of interest legislation, and is it bipartisan?
Unfortunately, none of our bills as of now are bipartisan. We have yet to get a single Republican on board. We absolutely think this should be a nonpartisan issue. I believe we have. I don't actually track all the sponsors for the DNR bill in particular, but it has a good number, and I can look that up in a second. But yeah, there's a good number of support from the DFL rank and file. Certainly Senator Carlson, certainly Representative Ryer. But not enough to get the majority yet. You know, and now talking about that financial assurance piece, because you're right, it is a huge piece. And so essentially what Dwayne is talking about here is that part of these projects, these mines are required to submit a certain amount of what's called financial assurance. And so essentially that's saying, if everything goes right, this is not even with a disaster, if everything goes right, and they were to close the mine down in, you know, year 1 through 23, that's how much they are saying, not us. DNR and Polymet came up with these numbers saying that's how much it would cost to reclaim the site. Now, the problem with this, what we have right now, is the orange that you can see here, that's how much it would cost. But the green is how much cash Polymet will have given us. So if you actually go to year 10, there's a $1 billion gap in between what they're saying it would cost to clean up versus what they're saying it would cost, or what they've actually given the state of Minnesota. Right there, you can probably see the problem. You know, what happens if there's a disaster, they declare bankruptcy, they shut down, you know, copper prices drop. Well, unfortunately, as of now, Glencore, which I'm going to get to, and I know someone alluded to this as well, is the owner of Polymet. This is a foreign conglomerate. They're not named on the permits. In 2019, Governor Walz said he'd like to see them on the permits, but he has the power to name them tomorrow if he wanted to, and he has yet to name them to the permits. And so as of now, if Polymet were to declare bankruptcy, we're all on the line for paying that. We cannot hold them responsible. And so what we're actually trying to do is pass a Taxpayer Protection Act that would simply say, pay that money up front and in cash, stand by your project, put it in some sort of trust fund, or whatever it might be. So we actually can be sure that we can hold you accountable. And just as another example, quickly, that dam collapse that I showed you earlier, that was a $7 billion cleanup. So certainly
I take
worrisome.
it the first 10 years back on the prior slide were covered by surety bonds and letters of credit rather than cash. Why is that not adequate? And would those be discharged if there were a bankruptcy?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so that's kind of what DNR would say to us is say, well, we're going to get these surety bonds, right? And so I think it's kind of a couple things where it's like, one, can we hold them accountable for these surety bonds if they declare bankruptcy? You know, that's an open question. We don't know the answer for sure. Our mindset, and again, follow up with me if you really want to get to the legal, because I would like to connect you with my lawyer on this, because you know I don't want to. I'm paraphrasing my lawyers on this,
Sure.
so I can absolutely.
Your lawyers being the MCEA.
Both. We have our own legal director, but we also do have MCEA representing us. So yeah, I would probably actually connect you with both of them. So yeah, absolutely.
I know
Because
the
our
folks over at
understanding is
MCEA.
no. And then there's kind of just the frankly political part of this where it's they have yet to, you know, granted they're so far from getting back to this point right now, but as of that point, they had yet to actually receive the surety bonds or letters of credit. So it's also an open question. You know, theoretically, DNR could say, hey, you didn't get these surety bonds, we're not going to allow you to go forward. So that is possible. However, from everything from our experience, we don't believe, frankly, that DNR would do that. They would probably say that they would. So that's kind of an open question. I personally have not seen the leadership from them to feel confident that they would shut down this project because of this, but they would have the power to do so. So it is kind of an open question, and it's a fair question for sure. But again, this is kind of why we're trying to say, let's take those questions out of it and let's say put that money up front and in cash. The other problem, and you know, sometimes when I do these presentations, I'm like, I don't know which problem to focus on because there's so many. Corrupt ownership, and this is something that someone was spot on with, and you saw where I was going. Twin Metals is owned by Antofagasta, which is a Chilean national company, or not national, I shouldn't say national, and it's not a, you know, it's not through the government, but it's a Chilean company. They polluted in Chile, they polluted around the world. They've had bribery scandals with the president of Chile. And the reason that you see this picture, some of you may recognize these two, that is Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. The reason that I have a picture of them there is just to show you the business practices of Antofagasta. In 2016, you know, obviously Donald Trump was elected. In December of 2016, the president of Antofagasta bought a mansion in Washington, D.C. A month later, who were his tenants? Guess what? Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner. A few months later, Twin Metals got their mining permits. And so, you know, technically they would say, well, there's nothing illegal about that. But whether or not there's something illegal about it, certainly not, in my opinion, ethical. And so, you know, very, very worrisome that the company, you know, that would be willing to do that would be operating near our boundary waters. And then, if possible, to be worse than that, is Glencore. Some of you might remember there's a gentleman by the name of Mark Rich. He founded Glencore in the 90s. He was on the FBI's most wanted list for a while because he was trading with the Ayatollah of Iran, apartheid South Africa. He was kind of infamously pardoned by Bill Clinton on the last day of Bill Clinton's presidency. He founded this company, Glencore, and they've really continue those values today. The reason you see this picture on the right is because in 2017, Glencore actually won the Medal of Friendship from Vladimir Putin for services to Russia. And so when we're talking about you know, a company that's still trading oil with Russia right now, certainly very worrisome. You know, they've had you know, settle for $1 billion in bribery scandals in the United States, UK, in Africa. You know, the list goes on and on. I have a Google alert set for Glencore, and it's like it's like I can't even keep up with it sometimes. How many bad acts they have. And so the reason we're so concerned about this is because our mindset is, look, if these companies won't take care of, you know, projects in their own country, why would they care about Minnesota? You know, and again, like I said, they're not named on the permits. It's very, very worrisome when we have companies like this that are you know, so corrupt, frankly, trying to do business here. And so what we're trying to do is pass a law called the Bad Actor Bill, which is simply say, you know, if you've had bribery violations, child labor violations, environmental fines over a certain amount, you cannot get a permit to do this kind of mining in Minnesota. And so that's really our way of saying, you know, let's actually put our money where our mouth is and incentivize these companies to be better. Because sometimes people will tell me, well, Scott, we got to do this mining here because they use child labor in these mines in Africa, which is unfortunately true. But the problem with that line of argument is the company using child labor in Africa is Glencore. And so we're saying we're going to somehow stop child labor by rewarding the company using child labor. You know, with a mine here, it just is nonsensical when you break it down like that, right? And so we're saying if we actually want to do that, let's give them an incentive to be better companies if Minnesota really is so important, which, you know, for our minerals, which of course, spoiler alert, we're actually not.
Who's that a picture of?
Oh, that's Mark Rich. Sorry, that's the
okay.
right there. So I know it's almost a caricature, but that's a real picture that he put out into the world. Again, water study. This is a really quick one. We are also working with the University of Minnesota Water Council. This is actually a bill that was kind of the brainchild of former Governor Arne Carlson. Some of you may have seen. He's a huge champion for this issue now in his post-governorship. And writes a lot of, you know, very critical of the lack of action on this issue in general, I should say. Essentially, it says, let's develop a 50-year clean water plan for Minnesota. We take our water for granted sometimes. You know, I certainly did before I started working on this issue. A lot of people don't realize this. 56% of Minnesota's water right now is considered impaired. You know, by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And so what we're saying is we need to make sure we have a plan to look at all these threats and ensure that we have 50 years of clean water. And so that plan was the scoping phase was funded by the legislature this session. And we'll be going back next session to try to get funding for the full plan. And last but not least, the Prove It First law. This is kind of our main law that we talk about. This was a law in Wisconsin for 20 years. It simply says if you want to do this type of mining in Minnesota or, you know, obviously in Wisconsin at the time, you know, we need to have independent scientific proof that this will be pollution free. You know, so that means show us a mine that operated for 10 years without polluting and was closed for 10 years without polluting. Because a lot of times the most pollution that we see, you know, comes from when these mines are abandoned and they're just allowed to pollute and pollute and pollute. This was a law, like I said, in Wisconsin for 20 years. It was repealed by Governor Scott Walker. And my mindset is if Scott Walker thinks it's a good idea, I think it's a bad idea, right? And so if he's against this, that makes me extra in support of this. And so we think this is a great way to protect all of Minnesota's waters. I mean, that's something that we like is that it doesn't distinguish between watershed. It's simply about adding another layer to the permitting process. Now, this one is where I do have a list of all the legislators supporting it. We actually are up to 75 legislators now, including Senator Carlson, who was actually on our Prove It First coalition call just yesterday. So I just spoke with him yesterday. And again, I'll offer that we have a monthly meeting of all the supporters of this. So if anyone wants to be invited to those meetings, just let me know. You're more than welcome to join. Additionally, Representative Ryer is a co-author as well, and she's, again, one of our biggest supporters. So we're grateful for them. Representative Richardson, we have not heard from on this issue yet. I'm not saying she's against it, but, you know, if anyone wants to shoot her a note and see if we can get her on board, that would be great. And then you can see here, this is just some of the environmental organizations and businesses we've actually grown, and I need to update this slide. But, you know, kind of seeing, I'm rushing a little because I do want to be able to answer questions, but you know, basically we have over 30 groups and businesses, environmental groups, local businesses, native groups, trying that support this law. And so we would love to see it passed. My ask for everyone here today is one, of course, you know, fortunately, you know, you have some pretty good legislators. So if you're in Senator Carlson or, you know, Representative Ryer, just send them a note thanking them for supporting all these bills. They're already on board, but it's always nice to thank them and make them feel good about it. If you're Representative Richardson, you know, just give her a little nudge. I think, you know, I have to imagine that she'd be with us. You know, it may not be her main area of focus, but we'd love to get her on board. And then finally, like I mentioned, we do resolutions, and we work really closely with the DFL Environmental Caucus, who some people might be familiar with, to introduce resolutions in support of some of these bills, in particular, the DNR Conflict of Interest Act. That, like I said, that passed into the party platform in 2020. And then Prove It First. We were actually 2% short in 2020 of getting it. We got to get the super majority. But we want to go back in 2024 and get it added to the party platform to see some action. To answer your question, Ron, about legislative action, we have yet to receive a hearing on any of these bills, unfortunately. I think, we have, like I said, 75 DFL legislators. It's in the Senate in particular, it's a 1-vote majority. And 2 senators in particular, Senator Grant Housechild and Senator John Hoffman, are not supportive. I believe, I don't know where Senator Nick Frentz is. He has yet to take a position. Every other DFL senator is supportive of Prove It First. And so, unfortunately, we need every single one, as we saw, to pass legislation. I am hopeful that we'll get a hearing on Prove It First in the next legislative session. But even still, we would still need to get either some Republicans, which we're trying. If anyone has any ideas, let me know. But we need Senator Hoffman and we need Senator Housechild if not. And so that's where it's
what committee? What committee in the Senate, and who's the chair?
Fong He, Senator Fong He, the Environment, Climate, and they have 2 environment bill committees in the Senate. I always get the 2 names confused, but it's Senator Fong He's Environment Committee. I should note Senator Fong He is probably one of the. It's hard to pick who's the biggest one, but he's one of the biggest supporters of ours. I believe between him and Steve Kwasinski, they have the 2 most Boundary Waters trips of any senators, and so I'm hopeful that I also, one thing doing this work, I have to recognize, there are other priorities as much as I want this to be the only one, right? And so we respect that they had a lot of things that they had to do this session, and they did a great job. And so we're hoping that next session we can have a little more focus around this, because I think they were really trying to focus on the issues they knew they had consensus on. But I think this session, there'll be some more opportunities for other bills. And so hopefully we'll get it in the Senate. And then in the House, again, Rick Hansen is obviously an environmental champion. He's the chair, but he does get pressure, from above to move other things or not move this. And so, we specifically need Speaker Melissa Hortman on board for this, because she is, as of now, not taking a position and not allowed a hearing in the House on this bill, on any of these bills. And so, we really want to move forward next session. I think, honestly, ironically, the House or the Senate might be where we get our hearing, even though it's a tougher vote. Whereas in the House, I do believe we have a majority of certainly, I think we have a majority that could pass it in the House if the Speaker were to be behind it. But essentially, that's part of the reason why we want to get it added to the party platform. And so that is, the 10,000-foot overview. I'm gonna put my my email here in the chat. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. But really, please reach out. We need citizen action members. We need all the legislators we can get on board. And if you have any information, any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer them.
Wow, that was phenomenal.
Thank you.
I prepared by generating a whole list of questions and reading some of the various decisions. I had trouble distinguishing among the various permits, the various mines, and the various entities. So when it says there are 3 major permits that need to be acted on, I think I figured out that one is NorthMed, and then there's PolyMed is over here, and it's all over the place. So
PolyMed is NorthMed. It's very confusing.
Yeah. I mean, and what I'm about to say is that you covered all of my questions.
All right.
Although I certainly took the liberty of interrupting you.
No, it's good. It's good. I appreciate it.
I want to open it up to anybody else who has questions. In the meantime, I was able to follow most of them in the chat as we went along. But if you have other questions, please raise your electronic hand or even your physical hand. And absent that, oh, wait a minute. There you go, Scott.
So I'm just really quickly putting a couple of the key quotes from that MPCA decision in the chat, so you can see that there. And then really quickly, as I believe someone mentioned, or we talked about really at the beginning here, the Betty McCollum bill that Angie Craig has not signed on to. I do have a take action link if you want to go through our system. You, of course, do not have to. But if you click on that, and it'll take you to your legislator. Again, I'm not in any way suggesting Angie is against this. I think she could certainly be brought on board, and we absolutely love to have her on board.
Well, I during the course of our conversation, I did send her an email on the subject asking her if she would come out publicly. And sometimes Angie responds to me, and when it's a hot button issue, she just ignores me, and that's okay.
Yep.
I understand. I understand that. I respect that. That's
Yep.
fine. But I've
Yep.
not heard back from her, and it could be that she's with her grandkids,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and that
Absolutely.
she's not going to respond. So
Right.
there's that. I
I
did
guess.
want to ask you about one of the other environmental entities, and I'm still not quite sure exactly what they do, and that's MN350. Are you
Uh,
familiar with those guys?
I am, and I'm certainly not the expert, but I'll give you my take on it, and take it with a grain of salt. So
Well, before you
okay,
do,
go
let
ahead.
me give you a warning, and that is T. McClenty, who is our current outreach officer, and who is going to uh, lead the thing, but for an event that came up at the last minute. I She may be the executive director of MN350, so just be careful
Okay, no,
what you
no,
say.
I appreciate the warning. I don't think I was gonna say anything that would have had a T upset with me, but I appreciate the warning. Yeah, so I believe she is the executive director. From my understanding, MN350 is the Minnesota affiliate of an organization that a gentleman, some people might know, but named Bill McKibben, who's a kind of a well-known climate activist. He started the group 350.org for nationwide, which was the idea that we are supposed to keep the climate, and I might butcher the science on this, so I apologize, under 350 million parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere, I
You've got the
believe is what it
concept
was.
generally, yeah.
And so basically it's a climate change activism group. And then Minnesota 350 is the Minnesota affiliate of it. I know their work best for working against Line 3, where they were one of the leading organizations because they were saying we don't need more fossil fuel infrastructure, which I think I as far as I know is, I mean, well, I know that's right, and I think they did a great job advocating for it. I don't know as much, to be honest, what they're focused on these days. They are a member of our Prove It First coalition, as in supporting the Prove It First law, and that's something that we kind of try to do to address some of the problems that you mentioned at the top, Ron, about like for instance, we will support Tamarac's Water Alliance in their fight against Talon. We won't lead it, and it's kind of the same situation with MN350 and us. But I'll admit I don't know as much about that organization, other than I believe they're primarily focused on climate change, and then also that they are. I will say that ourselves, Sierra Club, and them and Conservation Minnesota are the only groups that, and I apologize if I'm missing any, but I think we're the only groups that have a political action side as well. And so I do know that they also do endorse candidates.
Okay. And I take it that the Friends does not get involved in pipeline issues, or do you?
As of now, no. We were again we were against line. It was kind of the same situation. Like we were against line 3, but we didn't really lead it by any means. I think if there was potentially to be a pipeline, that threatened the boundary waters specifically, we would certainly get involved. But as you say, it'd be one thing if we had this like giant, and I've don't worry, I've had dreams of this, of a giant environmental organization that worked on everything. But as of now, it is a capacity issue, and so for us, focusing on the the sulfide mining takes up quite a bit of resources. So we are more in a support capacity and kind of look to our friends to lead those pipeline fights.
Okay. And one of the things that I've been very proud of, in many years now that I'm a Minnesota almost native, having lived here most of my life now,
No, we'll give it to
is
you.
how wonderfully environmentally conscious the state is. We don't have too many bad droughts. The fires have not hit our land. When it's 115 in Phoenix, it's only 90 here. We do have an occasional tornado, and hail was a problem last night. Um, I'm interested though in one of those, and that's the wildfire problem, which we have had some experience with, particularly this summer. And it really boils down to two questions: A, to what extent is the Friends involved in wildfire type issues? And I guess more broadly, it would be a climate change. And B, do you have any comments on the fire situation if in fact the Friends is not actively involved in that?
No, it's a good question, and there's kind of two sides of it, right? There's kind of this new issue. I mean, maybe not new, but certainly way worse this summer. I would imagine we've all noticed with the the Canadian wildfires and that smoke blowing down. As of now, we really haven't taken any action on that specifically, and I don't 100% know what it would be if we did. But that being said, if it continues at this, maybe there is something that we would have to look at. The second part is specifically wildfires in Minnesota, and specifically 2 summers ago, there were some pretty bad wildfires in the Boundary Waters, actually. We do work with the Forest Service. We have faith in the Forest Service, especially now that they've received a lot more funding to really deal with those. And so we kind of just try to, we bought some food for the firefighters and things like that. And we actually had a webinar with the Forest Service just so they could kind of get the news out, like, hey, this is what's happening, but as of now, we're not really directly involved in that. We just try to support the Forest Service in fighting the fires as best as they can.
Okay, Rob, I see you have your hand up.
I just got a quick comment about our question. Have you done outreach to the Minnesota Youth Council and the youth in government programs and youth organizations that are civically involved? Because I think your whole presentation, there's a question that kids need to study about climate and about the wilderness and develop the arguments and get the research to show that in fact your positions are worthy of debate. But I would encourage you to get those kids involved, because then you wouldn't have to do the presentation in the schools. The kids could be doing the presentations themselves.
Yeah, Rob, that's a great point. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying, have you done that outreach already, or are you?
So I would say that's an area for improvement for us. We've done some, but not specifically with the Minnesota Youth Council. So if you actually have a connection with or like a contact, I'd love to get that from you. We do have a outreach person that started within the last 6 months, and so we've been getting her up to speed. Like as Ron knows, Maggie was the one that kind of scheduled this for me. So I think the short answer is not enough. We need to do a lot more in that area, and so that is an area for expansion. And if you have specific groups, we'd love to speak with them.
All right, I'll send you some names.
Thank you.
All right, Scott, we've hit our hour. I don't know if you have any closing remarks you would like to share.
Just thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to do these because I know, people who take their time out of their day to do something like this, that's the people that care the most. And so we wouldn't be where we are without all of you. And please shoot me an email, give me a call anytime. And Lynn, please, again, thank Senator Carlson for me, and thank you to yourself as well. And so thanks everybody for having me. I really appreciate you hearing me out. I appreciate the good questions. And so if there's ever anything that you hear about the mines, or like, hey, they said this, what do you think about this? We're not afraid of any questions. We really feel that if we got to this position by looking at the facts objectively, and anybody who does the same will come to the same point as us. So thank you so much. Your dedication means everything, and I really appreciate you having me.
And we're glad you're there doing the work that you're doing, because without you and all the myriad other organizations, the planet would be on fire. Oh, wait a minute. The planet is on fire.
You can't close it on that. No, we're going to stop the mines.
Really.
We'll leave it at that.
Our most senior DFL 52 officer is Curtis. I don't know if you have any comments about